I'd say by now you probably figured out sort of my pattern. I like to describe how things are supposed to work and then get into the things that might go wrong or why they don't always work or what the trade offs or risks are. And that's exactly what I'm doing here with monetary policy. So far, what we've done is we've explored what is money, which is the root word of monetary in monetary policy. We looked at that, and then we looked at the Federal Reserve. What's the Federal Reserve? Or sort of, I did an umbrella, broad look at what the Federal Reserve is or what it does. To make specifics about the banks are in your textbook. I've never found that very useful beyond trivia. Um, the specifics on the banks, that is. Uh, and then we looked at sort of the mechanics of how the Federal Reserve can impact the economy. We started off with what the money multiplier is and how to calculate that, just as an exercise in textbooks most often. But most importantly, we left off with how in the market for money, the Federal Reserve can change the money supply, increase it or decrease it, and affect interest rates. And then I used that to transition it back to our aggregate supply, aggregate demand framework to look at how that can be used to close a recessionary or an inflationary gap in our framework that we had explored with aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So now let me get into, well, some kind of conflicts in macroeconomics around this, around what we have done. What I want to look at is called the quantity theory of money. And the quantity theory of money is this little equation that looks a little like this. I'm going to work up here. MV equals PY, where M equals the money supply. V is equal to the velocity of money, which I'll define, don't worry. P is equal to the price level. And Y is equal to RGDP. Okay, this says where. Proceed as if it says where. Now it does. Okay, let me define what these are. Money supply, I think we have a pretty good feel for that after what we've done. The velocity of money is a new one on us. That's like the turnover of money in the economy. How quickly is money changing hands? So generally, it doesn't change very much, the velocity of money in the short term. Some things have accelerated the velocity of money, like Micker ink recognition in the 1950s that I mentioned in my timeline. That sped up the velocity of money because checks could be processed more quickly. The implementation of credit cards has probably sped up the velocity of money when that became a major thing, probably credit cards and debit cards. Debit cards is what I meant, actually. In the really the 1990s, the velocity of money might have moved some then. And the velocity of money might be on the move right now with things like Venmo and PayPal and things that where we can transactions can happen much more quickly than they could have, say, 10 years ago. So there are probably periods of time when the velocity of money moves at a fairly adjusts, but generally the velocity of money is a fairly constant thing. For our purposes of analyzing the quantity theory of money, we treat it like it is, whether right or wrong, but it's generally well supported. That's a fairly steady variable there. Our GDP is really related to employment, right? Because people make stuff. And remember, the Federal Reserve has that dual mandate to maintain price stability, that is to not allow inflation, and to maximize employment at the natural rate of unemployment, or corresponding to the natural rate of unemployment. That's what I mean by that. But the price level, if that's rising, that's inflation. And so if you think about these two together and how these two interact, real GDP being affected by the price level should sound or feel a little familiar with something that we discussed back around economic growth and measuring the size of an economy, and that is nominal GDP. Because remember, real GDP is nominal GDP when you've stripped away the effects of inflation. Well, if P is the price level and Y represents real GDP, what we're talking about there, putting those two concepts together, that's nominal GDP. So what we have then is changes in the money supply. Let me change colors. Changes in the money supply. If we increase the money supply over here, something has to happen over there for that to still be equal, right? We can't increase one side of an equation without the other side increasing. The question is, and the debate in economics is, well, what's going to increase and for how long before the other thing increases? Because look, if we increase the money supply and it is purely a price level rise, that's just inflation, and employment doesn't move because output didn't move. If we increase the money supply and the price level rises a little bit and output rises a little bit, that's okay. And in our aggregate supply, aggregate demand framework, when, well, I can draw it. Let me shift back to green. If short-run aggregate supply is curved and aggregate demand is down and we are down in the, I have to label it up here for a change because that's the way I drew it. If we are down here in this Keynesian range and the Federal Reserve does everything that we've done, increasing the money supply, and we move back to here, well, everything is just wonderful. We've had a little bit of a price rise, and we've closed the recessionary gap, which this is a change in real GDP, right? So these things have gone up. And that's what we, as the Federal Reserve, that's what the Federal Reserve is hoping to do. So that's everything working well. But long-run aggregate supply, the classical view was that the economy can produce what the economy can produce, and everything else is just a change in nominal variables. If we did not have any short-run aggregate supply curve there, or if perhaps it would be more so if it were more linear and less curved, but if we just imagine just long-run aggregate supply, the classical view, and aggregate demand is way down as it is here, I just changed the label to the bottom. Well, this is where we are, and if we increase the money supply, all we do is push up prices. Maybe I should have done that with a red arrow. All we do is push up prices with increases in the money supply. Pure inflation. So what I'm getting at is called the distinction between the classical dichotomy between nominal variables and real variables. The price level is a nominal variable. It's not people waking up in the morning and going to work. That's very real. This morning the air was very cold outside of my bed. The blankets were very warm. Getting out of bed and going to work was a very, very real thing for me. The price level is nominal. If my wages rise and my prices rise, getting out of bed is still the same. I'm still doing it the same amount. So those are nominal variables, prices, and thus the money supply, if the classical view holds that supply creates its own demand and that the long-run potential of the economy is what the economy can do, and that's it and that's all. But to date, the changes in the money supply have in fact led to changes in output. And the reasons that might be so, one reason, the most cited reason, is what's called money illusion. And that is because when we get more money, we feel like we're getting a real raise, and we actually respond to it. Another aspect of this is related to that medium of exchange of money. As long as we don't think that the money is going to lose its buying power, we're happy to get more money and hold on to money the same way we were, to treat it like it was so we can affect real variables. If, however, we don't feel that way, if we feel that money is losing its medium of exchange, then it can lose its store of value, and it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and changes in the money supply can lead directly to changes in the price level without changes in output. So that's just a very quick version of some challenges with the elegant theory that we had explored, and a little bit of an explanation of the quantity theory of money, and a little bit of food for thought, and a little bit of both sides of the debate between classical and Keynesian economics, and I think a pretty good breaking point.